going to talk about the 3 release candidates that have been released this week. So first up, I would invite Matthew Darwin to talk to us a bit about the Mandel 3.1 release candidate 2.
Yeah, as the EOS Nation block producer operations team, we've been testing Mandel since actually before the first release candidate. And release candidate 2 is released, fixed a couple of issues. There's a few more issues coming in the future release candidate. But at this point, we have felt that it's reliable enough actually to deploy on EOS mainnet, and we have done so. The EOS Nation infrastructure is running Mandel 3.1 release candidate 2, except for the block producer node. So the block producer node, we've left it on the existing Node EOS earlier versions. But the rest of the infrastructure that you might be using are API nodes, or if you're connecting to our peer-to-peer nodes, yeah, it's running Mandel 3.1 already. So the official upgrade date is still a few weeks, a month away. But already it's working, good, stable. I can sleep through the night when it's running. That's a good sign. The new features that are provided that came from API Plus, Blue Paper, those features are actually enabled on our API node. So if you want to try the transaction retry, for example, that feature is available. You're welcome to try it. We are using the new blockation, or I don't know exactly I forget the name of it. There was a few different names, but the feature that allows the block log to be trimmed so it doesn't take up huge amounts of disk space for nodes that don't need the full history. That was a feature in 2.1, and the ENF development team rewrote that for Mandel 3.1. So that's a cool feature as well.
Great. Thanks, Matthew, for sharing your experience with the new Mandel 3.1 release candidate 2. Glad to hear that everything's working just fine. Areg, if you want to join the chat here and talk about the other 2 release candidates, go ahead.
Sure. Okay, so last week we were busy. We had 3 releases. In the last fireside chat, I did already mention the 3.1.0 RC2, so I won't go over that again. I will, however, mention that I mentioned last time that we are still holding off on recommending activation of the crypto primitives protocol feature on test networks until we can do some further testing. So that testing has now been completed, and now we can recommend that all the protocol features of 3.1.0 RC2 can be activated on test networks. So that's the only update there since last week. So the day after the fireside chat last week, we also released CDT 3.0.0 RC1, as well as system contracts version 3.1.0 RC1. So I'll briefly go over those. The CDT release, one of the big changes here that contract developers should be aware of is it's been renamed from EOSIO.cdt to just CDT. So there will be some small rename changes needed in your CMake files, just renaming EOSIO.cdt to CDT essentially, in order to use the new CDT 3.0.0 release. But there's no other breaking changes to the API, so contracts should compile fine. This is just a cutaway to new version and get a fresh start there with the name. As far as new features go, there's some C+ wrappers for the crypto primitives. There's more C+ wrappers that we want to add in the future. For now, we just added support for getting the current block number, as well as some of the hashes, the SHA-3 hashes functionality. And then there's this cool new feature called the stack canary. So I will go a little bit technical into this. I think it's worth going into. So the way the WASM linear memory works is, so you have just this blob of memory, addressable memory, and the heap and the stack are all placed there. And CDT gives you some level of control of where you place the stack. So normally it would place the stack, stuff that grows as you go deeper into, as you call functions, nest calling functions. That thing will grow, or that thing will be positioned at the beginning of the memory. And the benefit of doing that is that if you ever overflow your stack, it will be a memory access violation and your program will terminate rather than doing bad, undefined things. There is a problem with that, though, which is WebAssembly has a limitation where the static data of your program, you can imagine like your strings that you have in your program, they have to all be stored in the first page of WebAssembly memory, which is 64 kilobytes. And there's a conflict there of putting the stack at the beginning and putting and requiring the data to be also in that first page, which essentially restricts your stack size if it's at the beginning to basically 64 kilobytes less than whatever the data of your contract takes up. And so that could be limiting for some contracts. So CDT has for a while now had the option of allowing you to put the stack in the end of the memory rather than the beginning, which allows you to have much larger stack sizes. The issue with that is that if you ever go over that stack size, you will start overriding over your heap memory and bad things can happen. So now with this new stack canary option, CDT will automatically generate code that will try to detect that. And if you do overflow your stack, it will just abort the action and also the transaction with the error code that's provided there in the README. So that's a nice improvement for increased safety for contracts that need larger stack sizes.
Quick question for you. What does CDT stand for?
Contract Development Toolkit.
There we go. Thanks.
Sure. All right. And then finally, the contracts version 3.1.0 RC1. By the way, it might be a little bit confusing here. We've had 3.00 for CDT and 3.10 for both Mandel or really EOSIO and the system contracts releases. This is because we had the not really a release 3.0 of both Mandel and contracts. This was the work done by Clarion OS, now Fractally team, commissioned by the ENF. And that was never actually fully released as a stable release. We just moved straight to 3.1 because we wanted to do additional changes and do things a little differently. So we skipped over that, which is why contracts and EOSI or Mandel is ahead by one. And so that's relevant here too, because the contracts 3.00 release that was never actually fully released included a lot of great changes that we wanted to release. And now we are officially releasing through this 3.1.0 release. So a lot of these nice features you'll find in the README here are from that work that was done previously. It's worth calling out though, because I don't know if anyone's actually talked about it. Plus there's some other changes that we've added on top of that as well. In contracts 3.1.0, the core contract has some cool changes. It has, first of all, adds actions to make use of some of the new protocol features like configurable WASM limits. So there's an action that block producers could call to set a configuration for higher limits on WebAssembly contracts. So that means that you might be able to deploy larger contracts that you couldn't deploy before. It means that you might be able to have a larger call depth, which might impact some contracts that do some heavier things. This is far more, at the protocol level, this is far more configurable, but we have to be careful with what numbers we provide because it is possible to provide really extremely high numbers that make the chain unstable or make it an attack vector. So for now, we basically have two settings, the default setting of low and a setting of high, which just bumps up some of these values that we think are safe. And then this is a feature that's come about from looking at what the community, so this next feature is one that's come about looking at what the community has been trying to build with contract pays by themselves and some of the issues they've hit. So one solution to contract pays is to distribute a private key publicly, as built into your application, but to restrict its usage in a way such that you can't really do anything that's not desirable with that key. It's mainly just used as a way to have have some contract authorize your transaction to use the CPU and net resources of the account that key can access. There was a problem with that though, which is in the EOSIO protocol, if you have a key to a permission, you could change that permission. And that's just how the protocol works. So that means that this contract pay solution that some people came up with in the community has a denial of service attack where they can't really abuse the resources, but they could just change the keys and block anyone else from taking advantage of the resources until someone with the active keys or owner keys would come in and fix it manually, which is obviously not a viable solution for some always-on service. So this new feature of limit auth change to the system contract allows optionally putting additional restrictions on the actions that can change permission authorities. So update auth, delete auth, link auth, unlink auth. And so you could actually create a allow list and a disallow list of permissions that are allowed to make those changes. And then I won't go through everything. There's some new feature added in 3.1 of tracking some block information, although that's mostly unnecessary due to the get block number protocol host function that's also added, but there's some extra data there. There's a new boot contract, which is useful for bootstrapping a new chain or especially a test chain. And then there's some backported stuff. So there's the Rex rounding bug that hit a lot of people that has been finally backported in and part of this release as well.